Hello guys, and welcome to the Unreal Engine 5 Complete Beginner Tutorial. This beginner tutorial is intended for the complete beginner who is looking to get started using Unreal Engine 5, whether that be for creating things like short films, games, or whatever you might use the engine for. In this video, we will cover how you can download and install Unreal Engine 5. We will cover the bare basics like the user interface and all of the basic viewport controls that you need to know. We will cover how you can manipulate objects using the move, rotate, and scale tools, and we will go over how you can get assets into Unreal Engine through various different means. We will cover some of the basic sub-editors in the engine, things like materials and blueprints, and the purpose of this video is just to build you a strong foundation in using the engine. That way you have all of the basic knowledge you need to start using Unreal Engine 5. And in the next video, that will be a follow-up video to this one, we're going to dive more in depth to some of the things that we actually learn in this beginner tutorial. So make sure you subscribe for that video. I'm currently trying to hit over 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and if you don't want to miss out on any future Unreal Engine content, make sure you hit that little bell icon. Also, if this video helps you out and you enjoyed it, and perhaps you want to learn more, I have some premium courses on my website that you can check out at smartpoly.teachable.com. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. If you are specifically looking to make games inside of Unreal Engine, luckily for you, I have a complete first-person multiplayer survival game course where we teach you how to make a complete survival game from scratch and from start to finish. I will also be adding more other courses on my website for those of you folks who aren't necessarily interested in making games, courses like how to make realistic environments in Unreal Engine, and so much more. So check out my premium courses on smartpoly.teachable.com, and without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into the video. So to go ahead and get started downloading the engine, you want to head over to unrealengine.com. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. Now you're going to need to create first an Epic Games account. So if you don't have an Epic Games account, you want to go ahead and create one. So I'll have a link to that in the description below. You'll just click sign up, and you can sign up with the email, Google account, Facebook, or whatnot. But once you create an account, you can go ahead and click this download button. And that will go ahead and download the Epic Games Launcher, which is what you'll use to install Unreal Engine. So chances are you might already have the Epic Games Launcher installed on your computer, which in that case you can just skip ahead to the actual install part. So now that we have the installer, we're going to go ahead and run that and click install. And then we'll go ahead and install the Epic Games Launcher on our computer. And once it's finished installing, go ahead and sign in with your Epic Games account. So I'm going to go ahead and click sign in with Epic Games. Okay, and now we are signed in, so this is the first thing that you're going to see when you launch the Epic Games Launcher for the first time. So if you never use the Epic Games Launcher, I'm going to go ahead and explain it for you. Basically, this main page that we're on is the store page. So over here on the left, we have these three different tabs. We have the store page, which is what we're currently on. So these are all different games that you can buy and play if you want to. Sort of like Steam, if you ever used Steam before. Then on the left here, we have this library tab. So if you click on that, these are all the games that you've purchased from the store. So again, this is more towards, the Epic Games store itself and all the purchases that you've made. But what we're interested is on this Unreal Engine tab. So if you click on that, that will actually take you to the Unreal Engine side of the Epic Games Launcher. So let's go ahead and dive into this. So first up at the top here, you can see we have these different tabs. Currently we're in the news tab, which means that we can see all of the news and events related to Unreal Engine. So you can see here Unreal Engine 5.3 was just released. We have a little news article you can click on. We have some quick links to the news blog on their website, the YouTube channel, Q&A, the forums, and the Unreal Engine roadmap. So those are nice, handy links. If you scroll down even further, you will have all of the different updates and events in the Unreal Engine world. So it's a really nice area to stay up to date with the latest updates. Next up, we have the samples tab. So if you click on the samples, these are all free sample projects that you can download for Unreal Engine. So we have this Lyra Starter game, which is a multiplayer third-person shooter game. We have this city sample, which is this open-world realistic city environments that you can run around. We have other different samples, and you can all click on these and check them out. They're very helpful for learning the engine and just seeing how things are done and implemented in these sort of projects. So you have things like game samples, and then down here, legacy samples. So these are a little bit older, about 5+ years old, but you can still try some of these out. So that is the samples tab. The next tab that we have is the marketplace tab. So if I click on this, this will take us to the Unreal Engine marketplace. So basically what the Unreal Engine marketplace is it's a place where you can purchase 3D assets for Unreal Engine, whether that be for making games or films. There's tons of different things that you can buy on the Unreal Engine marketplace, and there's a lot of actual free assets on here. So let's go ahead and talk about the Unreal Engine marketplace. So first up, you have this little banner here. Usually if they're running some sort of promotion, some sort of sale, you're going to see up here whether or not they have a current sale. Usually they'll have quarterly sales. They'll have like a summer sale, a fall sale, and all that stuff. If you scroll down, we have the showcase. So these are all of the showcased assets. You can see some of these have discounts on the asset price. You can see the discounted price there. If you scroll down even further, we have this free for the month. So this is very important because every single month Epic Games gives away 5 free marketplace asset packs. So these asset packs, you can see they actually cost money. So this is $9.99, $29.99. You can see these are real assets that are sold here on the marketplace. But what Epic does is they go ahead and pay the creators of these asset packs in exchange for making them free for 1 month. So if you come to the Unreal Engine marketplace every single month and claim these, you just have to add it to your cart and check out. It's 100% free. You'll own these assets forever, and you can use them for your projects, because after the month is over, so for this month, the month of September, these marketplace assets will go back to the original price for, $9.99, $29.99 and whatnot. So very important that every single month, even if you're not going to be using all of the things in here, I'd recommend you just come open up the Epic Games launcher and claim all these assets. I've been doing this for many, many years, and I've amassed a massive library of free assets that I'll show you here in a second. So that is the free for the month. If you scroll down, we have some other different things like special discounts, and then also new releases. So on the marketplace, there's also some filtering. So you can search products right here. You have things like the different categories. So you can browse by 2D assets, animations, characters, environments. So I click on environments. We can see all the different Unreal Engine environments. And one neat thing is you can filter by free. So if you click on this free, you can browse Epic Games content. So these are all the samples that Epic has free, and also some assets. So you can see we have these control rig samples pack, we have the mannequins here, and just a bunch of other free assets that you can use, like these little environments and props. So very handy. You can also filter over here by price range and all that stuff. Okay, so that is the Unreal Engine marketplace. Next up, we're going to go to the library tab. So if you click on library, this is actually where you can install Unreal Engine. So you can see we have engine versions, and we have this little plus icon. So this is where we're going to install the engine here in a second. And down below it, we have projects. So this is where your Unreal Engine projects will show up. We currently don't have any projects, but later on, when we actually go ahead and create one, this is where you will find it. Now, if you scroll down even further, we have the vault. So basically, the vault is all of the Unreal Engine marketplace asset packs that you've either purchased or that you've claimed for free from the marketplace. They will show up in your vault, and here's where you can actually go ahead and add the content pack to your project. And I'll go over that more in detail later on in the video. But as you can see, I have quite a bit of assets here. Most of this stuff I got for free from the Unreal Engine marketplace. So again, it's just claiming those 5 free asset packs every single month. So just make sure you do that, because you will collect quite a bit of free assets. The last tab on here is the Twin Motion tab. So if you click on it, basically Twin Motion is for architectural visualization. So this is a completely separate program that you can check out. But like I said, we're more focused on the Unreal Engine side, so we're going to head back to the library tab. So that is the Epic Games launcher. Now let's go ahead and focus on how we can install Unreal Engine onto our computer, and of course all the installation settings. So to install the engine, you have 2 different options. You can either click this little plus icon right here, or you can click this install engine up at the top. I'm going to click on this little plus icon, and automatically, if you don't have any versions or previous versions, it's going to automatically assign the most recent version of the engine. So you can see it's 5.3.0. So real quickly, let's talk about the version. So 5 is the major version. So we have Unreal Engine 4, and then now we have Unreal Engine 5. Then .3, this is the sub version. So we have Unreal Engine 5.0, 5.1, 5.2, and then 5.3. And then we have basically like the minor version of that. So if you're watching this in the future, it could be 5.3.1. And basically that number after the subversion is sort of like bug fixes to, the main version of the engine. Now, if you click on this actual drop-down button, you can select the version of the engine. So you can see we have 5.3.0 selected. Then you can see the previous version before that was 5.2.1. And then before that, there was 5.1.1. Then we had 5.0.3, and then it even goes into Unreal Engine 4, so you could even install the older engine, which is Unreal Engine 4, and it goes all the way back, okay? So in our case, we're going to select the newest version of the engine, which is 5.3.0, and then we can go ahead and click on the install button. So now it's going to ask us choose an install location, so you can choose where you want to install it on your hard drive. I'm going to leave it at the default location. Now, before you click install, this is very important because there are some options that you can customize, and this will save you storage depending on what you're using Unreal Engine for. So if you click on this options, you're going to see that you have a couple of these different checkboxes and certain things that you can choose whether or not you want. Now, all of this core content up here, I'm going to leave that all as checked because we're going to be using all of the templates. I recommend you leave these all as checked because these are very useful starter content. If you scroll down here, this is the main part where you can customize. So under the target platforms, these are the different platforms that you can create Unreal Engine projects for and package for. So we have things like Android, iOS, and Linux. Now, if you have no desire to release either a game or package an Unreal Engine project for these platforms, you can uncheck all of these platforms, and this will go ahead and cut down the size and installation of Unreal Engine. Now, this is very useful for folks who aren't going to be packaging for these platforms or maybe making games for these platforms. You can just go in and uncheck all of those. And later on, say you change your mind, you can always come back and modify the version of the engine and install these components if you need to. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit apply here and click install. And then it's going to go ahead and start downloading the engine. So you're going to see it's initializing. So I'm going to go ahead and give this probably about 15 minutes to download and install, and I'll be back when it's finished. All right, so we're back. So it finished installing. So as you can see, it is now installed. So now we can go ahead and actually launch Unreal Engine. So you can either do this two different ways. So you can click launch right here by clicking on that button, or you can click the launch Unreal Engine 5.3 up here at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and click the launch button. So it's going to ask us to install the prerequisites. So we're going to go ahead and have to install those real quick. Should only take a couple of minutes. All right, so now we've launched Unreal Engine. So the first thing that you're going to do when you launch the engine is it's going to ask you to create a brand new project. So you're going to pop open with this Unreal Project Browser. And let's just go ahead and talk about this real quickly. So first up, you have these different tabs here on the left. So we have the first tab, which is recent projects. So if you've created projects previously, you're going to see the projects show up over here. Currently, I don't have any projects created because this is a brand new installation of Unreal Engine. So you can see I don't have any projects shown. Now if you click on the next tab below it, we have this games tab. So this shows us basically all of these little templates that we can choose to pick from if we're going to be creating a game with Unreal Engine. So you can see we have the blank template. So this is a clean, empty project with nothing in it. We have this first person template. So if you're creating a first person shooter game, this comes with a pre-made character controller and all that stuff. We have the third person template, which is a third person character with a third person camera. We have things like a top down RTS style template, handheld augmented reality. We have a virtual reality template for VR. And then we have this vehicle or racing game template, okay? So those are the different templates. Below the games, we have film, video, and live events. So you can choose a blank template. We have things like virtual production, DMX, in-camera VFX, and a end display template. So depending on what you're using the engine for, you're going to be creating your project from these different templates. And really, it doesn't matter a whole ton. All of these templates give you, pre-made project that has some stuff already set up for you, so it may save you some time, but at the end of the day it's going to be the same engine despite the template that you choose. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now, architecture, we have some other different templates for architectural visualization. So again, you can select whichever template that you're going to be using the engine for. And then of course we have things like automotive, product design, and manufacturing. And then lastly, we have this simulation template. Okay, so those are all of the different templates that you can pick from. Now I'm going to be selecting my template from the games tab. And again, you can pick any other template if you want to and check some of these other things out. It's all going to be the same engine nonetheless. But for me, I'm going to be choosing the games template. I'm going to go with the third person template. So just a simple template, and it comes with this little character. Now, one thing you're going to notice with specifically the games templates is you're going to have these other different options. Now, the options will be different depending on which section you're in. So if I'm in the film and video, you can see we just have these two different options. Now in the games, it's different because you can pick either Blueprint or C++. So if you're going to be creating a game inside of Unreal Engine, you can pick basically the programming language that you want. Now Blueprint, I'm going to explain what Blueprint is a little bit more at the end of this video, but basically it is the visual scripting system of Unreal Engine. So it's the proprietary scripting system. And then you have C++. Now you can always convert your project from Blueprint to C++ or vice versa. So you don't really have to worry too much about that. I'm going to leave mine as Blueprint. For our target platform, you can click the drop down, you have desktop and mobile. So that's which platform you're making your game for. Again, you can always come back and change these settings if needs be. So if you set something in here and you want to change it later on, you can always come back to the project settings and change it. So we have quality preset, you can set it to maximum or scalable. You have things like starter content. So this includes some starter assets. I'm actually going to hit that little checkbox. That way we can play around with a couple of different assets that we get. And then ray tracing, whether or not you want ray tracing to be enabled in the project. And again, you can always enable or disable this later on in the project settings itself. Then down here at the bottom, you're going to see the project location. So where it's going to store the project on your hard drive. So if you want to choose a different location, you can click this little folder icon and browse to a different location on your hard drive. And then for the project name, you can go ahead and rename this. I'm just going to rename this to my first project. And then we can go ahead and click create. So that will go ahead and launch Unreal Engine or the Unreal Editor. Okay, so the first time you open up the engine, you might get this little message, new plugins are available, and you can see that it just faded away there. But basically, if you get any sort of little notifications down in the bottom right, chances are you can just click dismiss on them. You don't really have to worry too much about it. But now we are in the engine, and so I'm going to explain everything that you see here, all of the UI, the controls, and all that stuff. So first up, we have in the center of the screen this viewport. And so let's go ahead and talk about the viewport itself. So if you right click and hold down the right mouse button on your mouse, in the viewport, I can look around. Now to move around the viewport, you can use your WASD keys. So you have to right click and hold down the right mouse button, and then you can use your WASD keys to move around. So you can use your W key to move forward, your S key to move backward, then your A and D keys to move left and right. Okay, so this is how you navigate in the viewport. You have to hold on the right mouse button and then use those WASD keys to move around. So if you look down, you can move down. If you look up, you can move upward like that, just by using your mouse and your WASD. Now there's some other different controls that you can do with your mouse. So if you scroll with your mouse wheel, you can see you can scroll in and out. So say I look down here, I can scroll in and scroll all the way out just by using the scroll wheel. And those are really just the basic movement controls that you need to know. Now in the viewport itself, there are a lot of little buttons. These buttons up here in the top left, as well as these buttons up here on the top right. So right now we're just going to focus on this main viewport and talk about what all these little buttons do up here. So first of all, if you left click in the viewport, you're going to notice that you're actually selecting certain objects. Okay, so if you left click, use your left mouse button. If we move around here, you can see that I currently have this object selected, and we can tell that it's selected because when I select it, we can see this yellow outline around this object that you have selected, and we can also see this little gizmo tool. So say for example I want to select this cube. You can see that I have the cube selected because it's outlined by the yellow color, and you can also see that we have this movement gizmo tool here on the cube itself. So let's talk about the movement gizmo. So the movement gizmo allows you to move an object around and manipulate it inside of the viewport. So for example, we have this cube selected. You can see that this movement gizmo has these 3 different arrows. If you look closely, they have 3 different colors. So we have a blue arrow, a red arrow, and a green arrow. Now if you hover over any of these arrows, you can see it's highlighted in yellow which arrow you have hovered over. So for example, I'm going to hover over this green arrow, and if I click and drag, you can see that I can move this cube by grabbing that green arrow. Now I can do the same for the red arrow. So if I hover over this red arrow and click and drag it, you can see I can move this cube left and right. And then I can also grab this blue arrow and move this cube up and down. Okay, so those are the little movement gizmos. Now these movement gizmos correlate with the axes of Unreal Engine. So if you look really closely at the bottom left of your viewport, you're going to notice we have that same little gizmo, and we have the 3 different colors. We have the blue, the red, and the green. So you can see the blue arrow corresponds to the Z axes, the red arrow corresponds to the X, and then the green arrow corresponds to the Y axis. So if I hover over and grab the red arrow, I'm moving my cube on the X axis. If I grab the green arrow and move it back and forth, I'm moving on the Y axis. And if I grab my cube by the blue arrow, I can move it up and down or on the Z axis. Okay, so those colors correspond to the different axes in Unreal Engine. Now we've covered the move tool, so we can move objects around. So for example, this cube. Now we're going to move on to the next tool, which is the rotate. So you can switch to the rotate tool by either clicking on this little button. So if you look up here on the top right of our viewport, we have these different buttons. So first we have the select objects. If I click on that little mouse icon, I can select different objects. Now if I click on this 4 arrows icon, you can see we get that move gizmo that we were just on. So that allows us to move objects. And then if I click on the next icon here, you can see this allows us to actually rotate objects. So if you click on those little circular arrows, you can see that our gizmo now updates to this new half circle gizmo. So you can see we have the green color, the red color, and the blue color. And again, we can hover over one of these half circles. And if I click it and drag, you can see that I can now rotate our cube like so. Okay, so I can grab it on the red half circle, which is our X axis, and I can rotate it on the X axis. I can also grab it on this green half circle and rotate on the Y axis. And I can also grab this blue section and rotate it on the Z axis. So you can rotate the cube like so by just grabbing these little handles and dragging it like so. Now, say you wanted to undo this. Say I messed this all up and I wanted to undo my settings. You can hit the keyboard shortcut Control Z, and that will go ahead and undo your changes. So you can see I can hit Control Z quite a couple of times, and it will reset our rotation back to the default rotation. Now I can switch back to the movement tools by clicking on the little icon up at the top. So you can see I can switch back to the movement tool, and now I have my little arrows, so I can move the cube around. Then I can switch over to the rotate tool, and now I have my rotation tools, so I can rotate this cube. Now you can also switch through hotkeys, so I could do W, so W to transform, and E will give us our rotation tools. And if you want those hotkeys, if you hover over these buttons, it will show you the hotkey to change to that mode. So we've covered the movement mode, we've covered the rotation mode. Now let's talk about scaling. So if you click this last icon right here, you can see that we can scale objects that we have selected. So now we have this new little gizmo here, similar to our movement gizmo, but we have these little cubes. You can see we have a green cube, a red cube, and a blue cube. So again, I can hover over the green cube, click and drag, and now you can see I can scale our cube on the y-axis. I can also hover over this red cube and scale it on the x-axis. And then I could also grab this cube and scale it on the z-axis, okay? And so that is how you can use the scale tool. Now, one good thing to note is that you can actually scale this cube uniformly, which means if you hover over the center cube and click and drag, you can see that it scales the cube evenly or uniform all the way around. So I can scale this cube and make it super big, or I can scale it all the way back down. You can also do this for two different axes. So if I hover my mouse cursor in between this red and green box, you can see I have both of them now selected. Now if I click and drag, we can scale it both in the X and Y axis, okay? This same thing applies to both the Z and X. So if I hover it in between those, I can scale it on both the Z and the X axis, okay? So just a nice, helpful tool. So again, to undo, we can do Control Z. Now we'll go ahead and undo all of the settings that we did. Now we can switch back to our movement by pressing W. We can switch to our rotation by pressing E. And then we can switch to our scale by pressing R. So those are the different hotkeys. We have W to move, E to rotate, and R to scale. Now the next thing that we're going to cover is this little icon right here. We're going to cover all of these little buttons here on the viewport. So we're just going to go from left to right. So this next icon here is this little cube icon. So this switches between world space and global space. So currently I have the scale gizmo selected. So let's actually switch to the movement tool. So when I switch to the movement tool, you can see right now it is set to global or world space. And you can notice this by that little sphere or globe icon. And if I click on it, you can see that it switches to this cube icon or local space. Now what this means is, let's actually switch this back to global. I'm going to rotate my cube like this. So I'm going to press E and rotate it about 30 degrees. Now if I switch back to our W key, you can see I can't rotate or move this cube in this direction. I can't move it diagonally. I can only move it by this grid, which sometimes, let's say I want to move this cube diagonally. So if I switch and click on this little icon and switch it to local space, you're going to see that the gizmo now changes and is orientated to the cube's local space. So now I can grab this arrow and move it diagonally, and it makes it a lot easier to move this cube around in the viewport. So you can switch it from local space back to global space, and you can see that the global space is snapped to this grid. And so this is very useful for manipulating objects, because you're going to find that you're going to have some trouble when you're moving an object around, and all you have to do is switch it either to the world space or the local space, and that will update your little gizmo there. Okay, so that is our local and world space. The next thing that we have here is control how objects snap to surfaces. Now if I click on this, you can see we have this little options menu, so we can turn on surface snapping. Now this has to do when you drag in objects into your world, where say I were to drag this cube into our level, we want this to snap to the ground rather than having to drag and drop it and align it up with the ground itself. Now we're going to cover this little setting later on, but basically that is what it affects. Now directly to the right of that, we have some other different settings here. So the first thing that we have here are the snap sizes. So if you haven't noticed already, if you look really closely at the cube, I can only move our cube by a certain amount. So for example, you can see that it kind of snaps to the grid. So no matter how hard I try, I can't get the cube to be placed precisely right here. Okay, it can only be either at this position or that position. Now that has to do with the grid snapping. So if I unclick this grid snapping, you can see that it is grayed out. It's no longer blue. Now if I move the cube, I can move it precisely where I want it to be on this grid. So you can see I can move it and position it right where I want it to be, and it doesn't snap to any sort of grid. Okay, so I can re-enable grid snapping by clicking on that little icon. Now it's blue, and now you can see that our cube snaps to this grid. We can also change the grid snap size. So if you click on this little 10 icon here, currently it's set to 10 units, so I can set it up to 50. And now if I drag my cube, you can see that it snaps at 50 units. So the grid snapping is more apparent. I could change this up to 100, and now you're going to see that the grid snapping is much further. And this is very useful for when you're trying to design a level or an environment where you need certain objects lined up at precise locations. You could use the grid snapping, and that will ensure that certain objects are spaced out equally. Okay, so I'm going to change my grid snap settings back down to 10. And again, if you want to disable grid snapping, which is also very useful if you need that precise placement, you can uncheck that little icon, and that will allow you to place your cube nice and smooth, and you can position it wherever you want without having to worry about that grid snapping. Now the next thing that we have is rotation snapping. So just like moving our cube around, if I press E to rotate, you can see that we can only rotate our cube by 10 degrees. So I can rotate it 40, 50 degrees, and you can see that grid snapping when I try and rotate the cube. So just like our other snapping, we can disable it. So if you click on the little icon there, it turns to gray. That means that it's now disabled. So now I can rotate this cube nice and smooth, and I can get that precise rotation on this cube. So again, very useful if you're trying to get a really precise placement or rotation on the cube. You can disable rotation snapping, that way you can get that smooth rotation. You can turn it back on, and you can also change the snap settings. So if you click on that little icon, say I wanted to rotate this cube 90 degrees, I can rotate it a full 90 degrees and get that nice accurate rotation. Okay, so that is our rotation snapping. I'm going to go ahead and reset that back to normal. Then lastly, we have our scale snapping. So again, if I press R on our keyboard, that will pull up our scale tool. And I'm actually going to reset this. So I'm going to do Control Z to undo all of the changes here. So now if I were to scale this, you can see that our cube snaps to this little grid. So you can see I can't precisely change it. So again, I can uncheck our scale snap button right there. It turns gray. So now it's disabled. So now you can see I can scale this cube really small or really big, and you can see I have a smooth scale on this cube. Okay, we can also enable the grid snapping, and if we want to, we can increase the snapping size. So if I want to snap it by 1, you can see that we have a much larger snapping size. Okay, so those are the different grid snapping options. Again, we have it for movement, we have our rotation snapping, and then we have our scale snapping. Now next up to the right of this, we have this little camera icon. Now this is very important because you may already have noticed when you move around the viewport, this is a pretty fast camera speed. So for example, if I'm trying to really zoom up on this cube, I can't get too close to it before I, move into the cube mesh. So if you want to change your camera speed, you can click on that little camera icon and you can decrease this. And now you can see I have a much slower camera speed. We have more control and more precise movement over our camera. Now you can go ahead and increase this all the way if you want a really fast camera speed. So this is really good if you have a massive open world map or environment and you need to move across the map very fast or very quickly. You can up your camera speed. Now you can also adjust your camera speed by scrolling on your mouse wheel. So if you hold your right mouse button and if you scroll by moving forward, you can see we can actually speed up our camera speed. So if you scroll up, it will speed it up. If you scroll down, it will slow down your camera speed. So just by holding the right mouse button and scrolling on your keyboard, that will affect your camera speed. Okay, so very important setting because it will help you when you're manipulating objects in the viewport so that you can turn down your camera speed and have that precise movement. Okay, so this last icon in our viewport is this little cube with a grid inside of it. Now if you click on it, what this does is it will give us a quad view of our viewport. So you can see our viewport is down here, and then we also have these other 3 additional viewports. So this one up here, if I scroll in and out, if you use the mouse wheel on your mouse, you can scroll out, and now you can actually see your level, and this is a back view of our level. So this is giving us a wireframe, sort of like an X-ray of all of the different objects in our level. So this is our cube that we have currently selected in this sort of X-ray wireframe view. Then over here we have this right view. So we have a right view of our level. And then down here we have this top-down view. Okay. Now if you want to move around, you can also pan by holding right mouse button. So if you right click in here, that'll allow you to pan around. And then again, you scroll in and out to zoom in and out. So this is very helpful if you want to get precise placement of your objects in laying out your level, whether that be for game design or for environment. You can get sort of this precise top-down grid view of your scene or your level. Now we can switch back to our main viewport by clicking on that little icon again. So right here, I'll go ahead and maximize our viewports back to the way it was. Now those are all of the different viewport buttons over here on the right. Now let's go ahead and move over here on the left and cover the rest of the viewport buttons. So over here we have this 3 lines icon. So if you click on this, this will give us a little drop down of options. So it gives us a couple of different viewport options. Now we have things like real time. So if you want to toggle real-time rendering on or off, you can disable real-time rendering on and off. I'm going to leave this on as usual, but say you have a lower end computer, you can go ahead and disable that by unchecking that. We also have things like show FPS. So if you want to show your frame rate, you can click on that little checkbox right there. And now you can see we're getting about 120 FPS in our scene. And it's just a nice little frame rate tool. We can go ahead and disable that by unchecking that. We have a couple of other things that we can change, other settings in the viewports, things like our field of view. You can change the field of view of the camera. I'm going to change this back to 90, which is the default FOV. You have a couple of different other options down here, and I'll highlight just a few more things in here. We have things like the game view. So if you click on this, you can see that it hides that little gizmo. So the game view, you can also press G on the keyboard. So if you press the G key, that will hide these little gizmos in the viewport. So I press G, that will go into game view. And now it gives us sort of this view as if we were playing the game. If I press G, you can see that we now have these little editor icons where we can see the little gizmo on our screen. So game view is sort of helpful if you want to take like a screenshot or something. You can hide that little gizmo by pressing G, and it will hide all of these little editor gizmos. Now another thing in this drop down menu is you can also take a high resolution screenshot. So if you click on that, it will pull up a little menu where you can take a little screenshot. You can increase the size multiplier, and that will increase the resolution, and it will capture it to a location on your hard drive. Okay, so if you want to take a screenshot, you can do it through there. Now there's a lot more other settings in here, but those are just some of the basics. So next up, we're going to move on to this next icon over here. So right now you can see we are in the perspective mode. So this is the perspective mode. Now I can switch this drop down and change it to orthographic. So I can click and select this top down view. And now you can see that we're in that top down view that we saw earlier. So if I scroll in and out, I can use my mouse wheel to scroll or zoom in and out. Again, I can use my right mouse button to pan around. Either that's up, down, left, or right. And you can see we have this top-down view of our level. You can see the cube that we have selected right there. And again, just a very useful view for when you're laying out objects in your level and you need that precise placement when you're laying it out. Okay. We also have other different views like the bottom view. So we can get a bottom view of our level. We can switch this to left. We have right. We have front. And then finally we have back. Okay. So I'm going to reset this back to our perspective. So I'm going to select perspective. And those are pretty much all the different settings in there. Next up, we have lit. So we can change the different view modes in our viewport. So currently we have the default lit mode, which basically has all these different shadows. You can see the lighting and all that inside of our viewport. We can click on this little icon and change it to unlit. And now you can see that we have this unlit scene where we don't have any lighting. There aren't any shadows, and this is actually very useful for people who are running the engine on a lower end machine. If you change this to the unlit mode, you should notice an instant boost in your frame rate. And so this is a very nice little tip if you're running the Unreal Engine on a lower end machine. Now we can also switch to the wireframe mode, which will give us that X-ray view that we were talking about earlier. So if you really want to see through all the different objects in your scene, you can turn on the wireframe and it will show you all the different little polygons that make up all the 3D objects in your scene. Okay. Next up below that, we have some other different options. I'm not going to go through every single option here because there's quite a bit of different options. You have things like, lighting only, reflections. There's just so many different view modes that you can go into. I'm just going to reset it back to the default mode, the lit mode, but a lot of these things will come in handy later on when you're doing more advanced things in the engine. Next up, we have this show. So this allows us to hide and toggle certain objects in our viewport. So for example, I could show or hide our atmosphere, and that will go ahead and hide those clouds and all that stuff. I can re-show it by hitting the little checkbox. I can show or hide the grid. So this little grid, let me go ahead and show it real quickly. So if you move out of this level, and if I zoom up real closely down here, you can see that we have this little grid right here. Okay. So sometimes it may be annoying that you can see this grid. So if you want to disable this grid, you can actually click on the show icon and hide the grid like so. Okay. So just a neat little tip there. You can also show things like the landscape, particles, and all other different types of objects. Okay. So again, I'm not going to go too in depth about all these different things, but there's quite a bit of different options that you have here. And again, a lot of these things will come in handy later on. Okay. So those are all the different viewport buttons. So just to recap, we went over the basic viewport controls, moving around in the viewports, manipulating objects by moving, rotating, and scaling objects. We went over things like the snapping sizes, the camera speed, the different view modes, and show options. So that is the viewport. We're going to go ahead and move on and start talking about the rest of the user interface. So things like this top ribbon up here, then other things like the outliner and the details panel. So first, let's go ahead and talk about this top ribbon up here. So first things first, we have these different tabs. So we have this file menu. So if you click on this, it will drop open a little menu. First things first, we have open. So you can open a level. So currently we're in this third person map. So you can see the name of the level that we have open right here, third person map. We're going to go over how to create a new level, but basically if you want to create a new level, you can do it by clicking on that, or you can open another level. We have other things like open asset, and then we have things like save. So this is very important because say I moved a couple of different objects in my level. We want to go ahead and do a file, save all. Now we'll go ahead and save any changes that I have made to our level or to our project by doing that file, save all. You can also click on this little save icon right here, and that will go ahead and save all the changes that you've made. So we have our save. Below that, we have imports. So you can import certain objects. I'm going to cover that later on in the video, so you don't have to worry about that just yet. Then lastly, down here we have projects. So we can create a new project. If we want to create a new Unreal Engine project, you can open a recent project by hovering over the recent projects, or we can exit our project by clicking this little exit button. Now, next up, we have the edit menu. So if you hover over this edit button, we have this little drop-down menu. We have things like undo and redo. So if we want to undo something, we can hit Control Z, or we can click on undo. That will undo that little movement that I did with the cube there. Or I can do edit redo to redo that movement. Okay. Then we have edit, cut, copy, paste, duplicate, and delete. So these are very important. And in fact, let's go ahead and cover these right now. So you can cut certain objects in the viewport. So if I select this cube and do Control X, that will go ahead and cut it. If I do Control V, that will go ahead and paste it. I can also do copy. So if I do Control C and then Control V, that will go ahead and paste that object twice. So now I have two of these different objects. I can also duplicate an object by hitting the keyboard shortcut, which is Control D. So if I hit Control D, you can see that it duplicates that cube again. Okay. Now I can go ahead and delete objects by selecting it and clicking delete. And that will go ahead and delete that object from our scene. Another neat thing for duplicating objects is if you actually select this cube, you can hold down the Alt key on your keyboard. And if you drag one of these arrows, you can duplicate a cube like so. So you just hold down Alt and drag an arrow, and that will go ahead and duplicate the object. Okay. So I find that very useful for duplicating objects. But again, there's many different ways. You can either do Control D to duplicate, or you can copy and paste it by doing Control C and Control V to copy and paste. Okay. So those are the different edit controls. Now below it, we have configuration. So these are very important because chances are you will be messing around with these different settings. So first things first, we have things like the editor preferences. So if you click on this, this will pull up things like the Unreal Editor settings. So when you change things like the theme, you can customize it here. You can change things like the viewport controls and all that stuff. And of course, if you mess things up in here, you can always reset it as the default layout. Okay. So that is the editor preferences. Below it, we have project settings. So if you click on that, this will pull up the project settings for our particular project. So currently you can see things like the project thumbnail. So if you want to change this thumbnail to a custom image, you can click this little drop down and select a custom image on your computer. You can change things like the project name, the version, and all that stuff. And there's a lot of other different settings inside of here that you can mess around with. And again, you probably will visit this later on. So just note that this does exist under the edit settings. Then lastly, under here we have plugins. So if you click on this little plugins icon, it will bring up the plugins. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of different plugins for the engine, and you can take some time to browse through all of these and look through all of them. The Unreal Engine comes with a lot of built-in plugins, some which are completely disabled. So for example, if you find a cool little plugin, maybe something like this camera shake previewer, you can click on that little plus icon and that will go ahead and enable this plugin. So chances are later on you'll be messing with plugins and you'll be coming in here to enable a certain plugin, and that will add more features or functionality to the engine. Now there's also third-party plugins that you can buy from the Unreal Engine Marketplace that will add more functionality or integrations with other different programs or with other different services. So just note to add plugins, you would come into the plugins tab. So that is all of the different buttons under the edit tab. Next up, we have the window tab. If you hover over this, you can see that we have all the different windows. So we have things like cinematics, content browser details. We'll cover these here in a second. But basically, say for example, I accidentally close one of our windows or I mess things up. So for example, this details panel, which I'll cover here in a minute. Say for example, I accidentally closed this little X icon and I accidentally messed it up. Or even this outliner right here, okay? So I accidentally exit out of those windows. To get that back, I can go to Window, and I can open up that specific window. So I can go to Window, outliner and click on outliner 1. And that will put that back right there. I could also go to my window and go back to details and click on details 1. Now we'll go ahead and put that window back right there. Also, I can reset the default layout. So if you go all the way down here, we have load layout. We have the default editor layout. So that will reset it just in case I accidentally close a bunch of windows by accident. Okay. Now there's a couple of other different windows in here. And again, you'll learn what all these different things do as you progress in using the engine, but for now we're going to go ahead and just gloss over some of these. So next up we have tools. So under the tools you'll find different tools for the engine. Again, these have to do with more different advanced things that you can do with the Unreal Engine. Now if you are using programming in C++, you can add a new C++ class through this little menu. But again, we're just going to gloss over these different things because they're not really necessary for the beginner to know. Next up, we have the build. So the build tab shows us different build options, things like building the lighting, reflections, and all that stuff. Currently, Unreal Engine uses dynamic lighting, so you don't have to build any lights because it's all dynamic. So for example, if I move this cube, you can see that the shadow reacts dynamically. So I can rotate this cube. We don't have to bake any lights because it's all done in real time. Now, if you were to switch to static lighting, say for example, you're making things like maybe a mobile game, or you want extra performance by switching to static lighting, under the build options, that's where you can build things like the lighting and also things like reflections. And again, we're going to gloss over a lot of these other different options here and just move on to the next tab. So next up we have select. So I rarely use this little tab, but basically this gives us the selection tools. So if you want to select all the objects in your scene, you can do select all or Control A. Now we'll go ahead and select everything in your scene. So again, you could do Control A and that will do the same thing. You can unselect all by doing Escape and that will deselect everything. You also have focus selected, or the F key. Now this is actually a really useful tool. So for example, say I select this cube and I'm all the way over here. If I click the F key, that will go ahead and focus my camera in on that cube. So this is very useful because I need to get over really quickly to this object. Instead of moving my camera to it, I can just select it and press F on the keyboard. That will go ahead and focus in on that object. It also works for things like larger objects. So if I select this floor, I can press F and it will focus my camera out so that it's completely in our view. Okay. So again, we have other different selection options. We have things like we can select all the lights in our scene and a couple of different things. Again, I don't really use this menu that often. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one. We have this actor tab. So this gives us a couple of different options related to the thing that we have selected. So if I select this cube, if I click on the actor, you can see that we have browse to asset, edit the cube, and a couple of different options, things like edit, visibility, snapping, and all that stuff. If you also right click the cube, so if I select this and right click it, you can see that we also have the same window right here. So this actor window also pops up if you right click this cube, and we'll cover this later on, but just note that you can get that same window by right clicking like so. Okay. Now lastly, we have this help tab. So if you click this drop down, this gives us a couple of different resources that we can use to help us learn the engine. So this gives us things like the documentation. We have the Viewport Controls. It'll show us the controls. We have quick links. So this will take us to the documentation pages. And down below we have community links, so we can open up the forums, the learning library, Q&A, and all that stuff. We also have options for support and reporting bugs for the engine. So just really nice, quick links to get help. So those are the different buttons up at the top, or the different little tabs. Let's go ahead and move down. So again, down here below it, we have the third person map. So this will show us the name of the map that we currently have open. So you can see it's third person map. Now directly below it, we have this little bar. So we have all the icons on this bar. So let's go ahead and talk about all of these. So first we're going to start from the left over to the right. The first thing that we have is the save icon. So again, If you move an object around, you click save, that will go ahead and save our changes. The next thing that we have is this little browse icon. So if you click on this little icon, it will browse to this third person map level. So if I browse to it, it will show us our third person map level in this content browser. And we're going to cover this content browser window here in a second, but basically that is what that little folder icon does right there. Now to the right of it, we have the selection mode. So currently we are in the selection mode because we can select objects with our mouse by clicking on them. Now if you click this little drop down, it will have these different modes that you can also pick from. So I can change from the selection mode to the landscape mode. And as you can see, it changes things in our viewports. We now have this green grid, and we also have this landscape window right here. So this will allow us to change through the different modes in the engine by just selecting the different modes. Now let's go ahead and actually talk about the different modes. So we have the landscape mode, which is for creating landscapes. So this is what you'd use to create things like mountains or hills, and you can do things like sculpting your landscape and all sorts of stuff. Next up, we have the foliage mode. So what this allows you to do is it allows you to paint things like rocks, trees, bushes, grass, all of that stuff onto your landscape or into your environment. It's a very useful tool because you can use sort of a paintbrush to paint all of those objects into your level rather than having to hand place each individual one. Now below that we have the mesh paint mode. What the mesh paint mode allows you to do is it allows you to paint directly onto a mesh in your level. And then this is very useful for artists to customize the look of certain objects in the level. Below that we have the modeling mode, which is a brand new mode added to the engine where you can actually 3D model objects inside of the Unreal Engine editor, just as you would in other 3D applications like Blender or Maya or 3ds Max. Next up we have the fracture mode. What the fracture mode allows you to do is to create destructible meshes. So for example, if I wanted to make this cube explode into a billion pieces, I could switch over to the fracture mode and fracture this cube to create sort of a destructible mesh. Below that, we have the brush editing. This allows you to create very basic brushes and geometry. I don't really use this mode that often, but it could be useful when blocking out a level. Lastly, we have animation. So again, another feature that Unreal Engine has is the ability to animate inside the engine itself. So you can actually create custom animations for characters or for different objects, and you can use this to create things like cinematics inside of the engine. But those are the different modes. We're going to go back into the selection mode, and again that will allow us to select different objects in our level. So to the right of the different modes, we have this cube plus icon, and this will allow us to add content into our project. So first things first, we have import content. So that will allow us to import 3D objects from our computer into our project, which I will cover later on in the video. We have things like Quixel Bridge, which is a neat library of high quality 3D assets. Again, we'll cover that later on. Below that, we have the Unreal Engine Marketplace, which is what we saw on the Epic Games launcher. I will cover how to add assets from there. Then below that, we have the content browser. Again, we'll cover that here in a second. But below that, we have some basic actors that we can add into our scene. So we have things like lights, cinematic things like cameras, basic shapes like cubes. So if I were to take a cube, you can see we can get to this basic plain white cube. We can also add other different shapes like a sphere, like so. And so you can add different objects from that cube plus icon. You can also add things like visual effects and volumes. So again, these will be very useful later on as you learn the engine itself. And then of course you have the all classes. So this is basically all of the different things that you can drag into the level. Now a neat thing about this is you can actually type in here. So I can type in cube and then it will go ahead and give us a cube from the all classes, and I can drag and drop that like so. Okay, so just a nice little neat feature that you can type in, search in whatever you need. Okay, so that is the cube plus icon. To the right of that, we have these little nodes. So basically this is the blueprint button. So you can do things like create a new blueprint class. You can also open things like the level blueprint. And again, blueprints are the visual scripting system of Unreal Engine. You can think of it sort of as programming, but without having to type in any code. We're going to cover blueprints at the end of this video very briefly, but they are very useful because you can create complete games with blueprints. And even if you're not making games inside of Unreal Engine, you can create custom tools with blueprints that allow you to speed up your workflow and much more. Now to the right of that, we have this little cinematic button. Basically, this will allow us to create things like cinematics or movies or short films. Then to the right of that, we have these different play options. So we have this green play icon. So if I hit this little play button, what you can see is we are now playing this third-person game. So we created that third-person game template. So if I click in here, you can see if I can move my camera around by just moving my mouse around. I can use my WASD keys to move around our level. I could also do things like jump, so our character can actually jump. And this is actually how you play your game if you're going to be making a game inside of Unreal Engine. And if you want to escape out of this, you press the escape key, and that will go ahead and pull you out of the play mode, okay? So basically the play mode is sort of for testing your game and actually playing the game. And of course you have other things like pausing, stopping, or even ejecting. And then to the right of that, we have these 3 different options. So these are some more options for play testing your game. So you can do things like play in a new editor window. And that will go ahead and play in this separate window right here. Or we can change it back to the selected viewports like this. So again, some more different options. You can also change things like play 2 different players and all that stuff, okay? So this more or less has to do with if you're creating a game inside of Unreal Engine and you want to go ahead and play test it. Now to the right of that, we have platforms. So if you click on this little drop down, this will show you all the platforms that you can package your game or your project for. So we have things like Android, iOS, Linux, tvOS, Windows, and all that stuff. So again, if you're going to package your project either as a standalone demo or a game, or maybe some sort of application that you want to send to a client, you would go in here and you'd select the platform that you want to package for, and you'd go ahead and package the project, and that will go ahead and convert this project into an executable file that you can give to your friend, and they can run your game or your demo as an executable file. Okay? So those are all of the different settings up here on the top left. So go ahead and move over here onto the right. So up here at the top right, we have the name of our project. So you have my first project. If you hover over this, you can see things like the version of the engine that you're using. So this is very useful because it'll show you the Unreal Engine version of the project that you're on, things like the branch, the build date, and all that stuff. Then we have things like the minimize, maximize, and close options. So if you want to minimize or maximize the Unreal Editor. Then down below that we have settings. So if you click on the settings, we have a couple of different things. Things like we saw before are our project settings and our plugins. So a little quick access to that. Now we have a couple of different options down here, but the main thing that I want to highlight in this window is the engine scalability settings. So this is very important because say you're running the Unreal Editor on a low-end computer. If you don't have the best computer, you can go to these engine scalability settings and you can set this all to low, okay? So that will set the lighting to low, that will set the graphics and all that to the lowest settings, and that should give you a performance boost. And even then, if you're still not getting the best of frame rate, you can go in and change this to unlit, and that should boost your performance as much as possible, just so you can at least use the engine if you're using it on a very low-end computer. Okay, I can reset all my settings by going back to the engine scalability settings. I can set this all to epic. You can also go all the way to cinematic, or you can go in and actually customize the settings by selecting the different options. Okay, so that is the engine scalability options. There's some other different things that you can customize in here, but I'm going to go ahead and just leave that as is. Below that, let's go ahead and talk about this outliner window. So this is the outliner. So this lists all the actors in the level by name, organized in this tree view. So basically you can see we have our third person map, and we have all of the different objects inside of our level. Okay, so you can scroll up or down this list. And the neat thing about this is if I select on this cube, you can see it's now selected in this outliner. You can see we have our cube selected, and say I select this object over here, you can see we have this quarter cylinder 12. If I select on this, we have this SM_ramp2. And again, we select our cube, and you can see that we now have that cube selected. You can also select multiple objects in the outliner. So if I select and shift select all of these cubes, you can see I now have them all selected in the viewports. So this is also very useful for, say, I get lost all the way over here. If I select this cube and click on the F key, that will go ahead and focus me back on that object that I have selected. So the outliner is very useful for selecting objects, and you can also delete objects from there. So I can select on this cube and delete it. That will go ahead and delete the object in our viewport. So I can do Control Z to undo that. But that is basically the world outliner. You can also do things like show or hide certain objects by hitting that little eyeball icon. So again, just some basic things, okay? You also have things like folders. So you can see this is a little folder. So I expand it, you can see all the different objects inside of that folder. So you can organize objects in your outliner by adding folders. And I believe all you'd have to do that is to right click up here on your third person map. You can create a new folder, and then you just drag an object into that folder, okay? So now you can see we have this new folder 1, and this cube is now in that folder, okay? So that is the world outliner. Next up below it, we have the details panel, or the details window. So if I select on this cube, what you're going to notice in the details is we now have that cube selected. And you can see because we have the name of that object, which is the cube. Now I have this ramp selected. Now you can see that we have the ramp 2 in the details panel. And what the details panel does is it shows us more different details about this cube, or about the object that we have selected in our viewport. So for example, we have things like the name, then down below it, we have things like the transform. So things like the location, rotation, and scale. And so if you remember back to when we were rotating and moving around this object, if we go ahead and move this cube, if I move this cube on the y-axis or back and forth like this, you can see the location is actually changing based on where we put this cube in our level. So this location controls the precise X, Y, and Z values of this cube inside of our level. So for example, if I wanted to reset this, I could set this to 0 and then go 0 and 0. So if I set our location to 0, 0, 0, and then if I press the F key on our keyboard, it will focus in on that cube. And now you can see our cube is placed exactly at the location 0, 0, 0. Okay? So the transform in the details controls the precise location, things like the rotation and the scale. So if I want to reset that by Control Z, that will go ahead and reset the location back to the default location. Now you could also hit this little arrow icon. So if you hover over this, it says reset this property to its default value. So if you click on that, it will reset it to the default value, which in our case is 0, 0, 0. Now we'll go ahead and set it back to this 0, 0, 0 location. Okay. Let's go ahead and move the cube back over here. But basically we can also change other things like the rotation. So if I wanted to rotate this 30 degrees on the X, you could type in 30 into the rotation there, and it will go ahead and update the rotation. If I wanted to reset it, I could reset it to the default value. And now you can see our cube has reset the rotation back to 0, 0, and 0. We can also do things like change the scale. So if I wanted to set this to 100 by 100 by 100, you can see our cube is now massive and it covers the entire level. And again, we can reset it by hitting that little back arrow, and you can see it resets it to the default scale. So you're going to see that little back arrow very commonly in Unreal Engine, and that just means reset it to the default values that we have set. Next up, we have things like mobility. So if it's a static, stationary, or movable object. Now this mainly has to do with things like lighting and physics. So you can see this other cube here is set to static because this is just a static object, but this cube over here is actually set to movable. And the reason why that is, if I hit play, if I actually run up to this cube, you can see we can actually move this cube around in the level, okay? Whereas this object right here is completely static, okay? So you can see those mobility options have to do with, you know, the object's mobility. We also have things like the mesh. So under here we have the static mesh. Basically, a static mesh is an object that doesn't change, and we'll talk more about this later on. Basically, static meshes can be things like rocks, crates, can be just different props in your level. You can actually change this static mesh and choose a different static mesh by hitting this little drop down. And you can see we have all these other different types of objects. Now below that we have things like materials. So we can actually change the color of this cube. So currently we have this blue material applied to this cube. If I hit this little drop down, I can actually change the color of the cube. So you can see we have this light blue color. So if I select that, you can now see our cube change to that new color. And we can go ahead and reset it by hitting that little reset arrow. Now we'll go ahead and reset it to that darker blue color. Okay. We also have some other different additional details, things like physics. So you remember earlier I can move this cube around. That's because we have this simulate physics set to true. Okay. Lastly, we have some other different settings and options down here, things like collision. Now this is very useful for when you're making games because it's going to be very common that you're going to be playing around with the collisions, especially if you're making a game. And this is basically where you change things like the collision settings. Okay, there's more additional details down here. I'm not going to go over every single detail in here, but just note that there are, you know, a lot more different details you can change. Those are just the basics. Again, if you select different objects in your scene, that will show you different details depending on the object you have selected. So again, the ramp shows us that it is this ramp mesh. It shows us things like the location, the rotation, the material, and all that stuff. Okay, so that is the details panel. Now the last UI that I want to talk about is this bottom bar down here. Okay, so let's go ahead and move from the left to the right. So over here on the left, we have this content drawer. So if you click on this, this will actually pop open this content drawer window. Now let's go ahead and talk about this little window because you will be using it quite often. So first of all, this window can pop open and hide. So if I right click back in my viewport, it will hide that little content drawer. So I click back in it, it will show it. If I right click in my viewport and move around, it will hide it. You can also do control spacebar to hide or show it. So just do control spacebar. That will go ahead and hide or show the content drawer. Okay. Another nice thing that I like to do usually when I'm working with the content drawer is I like to click this little dock in layout. And this will come very handy as I will show you here in a second. But basically this is the content browser or the content drawer. And this is where you can import 3D assets, sounds, textures, models, materials. You can import all those assets into this browser and you can bring it into your level. So first things first, over here on the left, we have the folder directory of our project. So you can see we have this content folder. We have things like characters, level prototyping, starter content. Let's actually go into this starter content folder. And as you select these different folders, you can see over here on the right, we can see all these subfolders inside of that starter content folder. Okay, so in this folder, we have different things like materials, maps, props. So go ahead and actually open up the props folder. And now inside of the props folder, you're going to notice a couple of different props that we have because of the starter content that we added. So we have things like this chair, this couch, and let's actually go ahead and bring some of this stuff into our level. So the neat thing about the content browser is you can drag an object from the content browser and drag it into the level. And that will go ahead and drag and drop the object into your level or your scene. So it's very simple as selecting the object that you want to add and just dragging and dropping it into your viewport. Okay, so we can add things like this little door. We have things like this little statue there. We have this little bush, and there's just different objects that you can play around with and you can drag into your level by just dragging it from the content browser into your scene. Okay, now to navigate in the content browser, you can go back by either clicking on the folders over here, or you can navigate by going through the different folders up here if you need to go back. Okay, you also have things like filters. So you can see I already have a couple of different filters. You may not have any filters in here, but basically if you hit this little 3 lines icon, this will allow us to filter our content browser by certain assets. So for example, if you don't have any filters, this is what it will look like. But if I want to filter my assets in my content browser by, say, static meshes, if I click on this little icon here, I can filter it by static mesh. And now you're going to see all of these static meshes inside of our content folder. You can see we have all the different props. We have all these different walls, cubes, and all that stuff, and all these basic shapes, okay? And that will show us the filter right over here on the left. And I can toggle on or off that filter. So if I select that or deselect it, you can see that disables the filter. If I reselect it, that will enable the filter, okay? So we're only seeing static meshes or props from our content browser. So those are the filters, and those are just the basics of our content browser. And you can even add your own custom content to your project through the content browser by dragging and importing your own custom 3D assets. You can do things like importing characters, sounds, textures, all that stuff by just dragging it into your content folder. Now let's actually take a moment to talk about how to create folders and organize content in the content browser. So to create a new folder in your content browser, you just right click anywhere inside of it, and you're going to see we have this menu pop-up, and basically we have a couple of different options. So I'm going to go down the list. So the first thing that we have here is we have import to game, so we can import some assets directly into our content folder. We can add a feature or content pack. So if you click on this, you can see you can actually add any of these content packs to this project. So for example, say I want some of the assets from the virtual reality template, I can add it to my current project. Okay, so you can add content, or if you go over to the content itself, this tab over here, let's say you forgot to add the starter content, you can add it to your project through here. Okay, so if you forget to add content, you can always come back and add content through that. Now below that we have Quixel Bridge, which is also another place that you can get free assets from, and I'll cover that here in a bit. And then we have the create a new folder, and then down below it we have basic assets and then advanced assets. Okay, so we're going to go over these different asset types, but first let's go ahead and just create ourselves a new folder. So under the folder we can create a new folder, and then you can see we can just rename this folder to test folder. And if you double click and open that up, you'll open up the folder, and you can right click, create another folder. And basically that's how you can organize content inside of your content browser. Okay, now for the different types of assets, if you right click, you're going to see there are many different types of assets in Unreal Engine. So we first have the basic asset types, which are things like blueprint classes, levels, materials, this Niagara system. And then below it, we have some more different advanced asset types. So if you hover over any of these different categories, you're going to see that we have more different asset types down here. Now, a lot of this stuff, you don't really have to know what each and every single asset does, but I'm going to cover some of the basic types of assets that we have. And in fact, we can do that by going to our content folder and opening up our starter content. So if you go into the starter content folder, let's go into first the architecture folder. So you're going to see that we have these different props. So like this floor, wall with a door. So these are all static meshes. So that's the type of asset that this is. Again, a static mesh is a prop or an object that is static. It doesn't move. So this can be anything like, for example, some of the objects that we have here in the level, like this chair, this bush, this window frame. These are all static meshes. And you can notice that these are static mesh assets because it says, for one, static mesh at the very bottom there. You can also see that it's color coded. So it has this blue line right here, and that means it's a static mesh, okay? So each asset type is color coded with a different color, and you'll become familiar with all the different asset types as time goes on. So those are static meshes. Next up, if you go back into the starter content folder, we have audio. So you can see we have things like sound waves. So if you play these are just basic sound files. And you can see the name of the asset, so it's a sound wave, and then you can see the color of that asset type, okay? So that's audio. We can go into blueprints. For blueprints, you can see it also has a different color. We have sort of this darker blue color for the asset, and then you can see it's a blueprint class right below it, okay? Now we're going to cover blueprints at the very end of this video, but right now we're just focusing on the different types of assets that you will find inside of Unreal Engine based on the name down here and the color code. Next up we have HDRI. So you can see this is a texture cube. You can see the name of it, and then you can see the color code of that file. Next to that we have maps, because you can see they are in this yellow or orange color, and you can see it says level at the bottom. Okay, so just getting used to the different asset types will help you distinguish what type of files are which, specifically in the content browser. Now next to the maps we have materials. So if you double click that, you can see that these are all material assets because of, again, it says material at the bottom. It has that little green color code, so we know that these are materials. And you can see that we have a little preview of the material with this little sphere that shows what type of material it is, okay? So if you look in here, we have things like gold, metal, rock, and all that stuff. Now we've gone over materials a little bit so far, but to apply any material to an object, say if I wanted to make this chair right here completely gold, we have this M metal gold material, and to apply any material to an object in your level, what you can do is you can just drag this material and drop it onto that object. Okay, there's that way. There's also another way that you can do it by using the details panel. So if you look in the details panel, we have this chair selected, and it shows us the material that's been assigned, or the material that we just assigned it to. Now one thing to note is we can always reset it. So if I hit this reset arrow, it's going to reset it to the default chair texture or material. Okay, and I can also drag in this gold material into this material slot. That will also have the same effect of changing the material as if I were to drag and drop it onto the object like this, okay? So again, we can reset it. So you can test this out with all the different material types. We have things like rock material, we have things like wood. So you can mess around with all the materials and just apply it to random objects in the level just to get more familiar with it. Now another neat feature about the content browser and about Unreal Engine is you're going to notice this icon a lot, especially when working with the content browser. So this little icon right here, so if you have this chair selected, you're going to notice we have this little folder magnifying glass icon. So again, this is going to be everywhere in Unreal Engine. You can see the static mesh has that little icon right there. So if you click on that icon for the chair, it's going to browse to that asset into the content browser. So this is very useful because say I want to find where this material is at. If I click that little browse icon, it will pull up the folder that has the material for that chair. So this is super useful because say I want to modify this door, I can select it, and then I can click on the little browse icon and find it exactly in the content browser. So you're going to see that little icon quite a bit throughout the engine, and basically that's what it does. You can browse to it quickly into your content browser where it's stored. Okay, so let's go back to our starter content. So we were just covering some of the different asset types. So we're in the materials folder. Let's go back and go over to the next folder where we have particles. So you can see these are particle effects, the cascade particle system, These are actually some older particles, but you can see we have things like fire, smoke, and explosion. Now if we go back, we have things like props. So if you go into the props folder, again, these are all static meshes. So we can see the static mesh asset name, as well as the color code is that bright blue color. Okay, and we exit out of there. We also have shapes, again, more static mesh assets, and then go back. And lastly, we have textures. So if you open that up, you can see these are all different 2D textures. So you can see it has the name texture at the very bottom, and we have this red color code for the assets. Okay, so those are all the basic asset types. Like I said, there's a lot more asset types. If you right click, you can see there's a whole lot more different asset types, and you can look at all the different names and color codes of them. And just over time, after you use the engine, you'll start to learn what some of these other assets are used for. So those are all the basic asset types. Let's quickly talk about the content browser again and how you can actually organize content. So we briefly went over how to create new folders. Now, to organize content, if we go into our props folder, you can actually move around assets to different folders. So this is very intuitive. So for example, if I right click and create a new folder in here, I can name this to my props. And then I could select this chair mesh and move it into that folder. So if I drag and drop it onto that folder, it'll give us a couple of options. We can do move here, copy here, or advanced copy here. I'm going to do move here, and that will go ahead and move that asset into this my props folder. So it's very intuitive where you can drag and drop files and move it around and organize it in your content browser. Now, if you wanted to move this back out of this folder, one way that you can do that is through this project directory over here, or through the hierarchy. So if I were to take this chair and move it back into my main props folder, if I drag and drop it right there, I can click move here. And now if I go back to our props, you can see that I moved the chair outside of that folder. Okay, so it's very intuitive how you can move and manage your assets in the content browser. So the same thing goes for deleting assets. If I select this window frame, if I click delete, it will give us actually a couple of different options. Now, whenever you delete an asset that is placed in a level or that is actually used, it's going to pop up with this little warning, okay? Because you're actually using the asset. So for example, I have this window frame. Because I have that dragged into my level, if I select it in the content browser and try to delete it, it's going to pop up with this warning. Some of the assets being deleted are still referenced in memory. So Unreal Engine doesn't like this when you try to delete stuff and you're still using it. Now, one way that you can fix that is you can actually go ahead and delete this from the level. So if I select that and delete it, then if I do File, Save All, I can go back to my content browser, select that window frame, and click Delete. You can see it's still referenced, so you can either replace it with another asset, or you can do Force Delete. Sometimes replacing the reference is better than doing Force Delete, because like I said, Unreal Engine doesn't like it when you delete stuff that is referenced. But I'm just going to do Force Delete just to show you what happens. So then now you can see that it's deleted from our content browser. And that's basically how you can delete content from being inside of your content browser. Now, there's no way to undo that. So if you do delete something from the content browser, there's no way to actually get back that asset. So just keep that in mind. So those are the content browser basics. Now let's actually go ahead and cover how you can get third-party assets and props, whether that be through the Unreal Engine Marketplace or another useful tool called Quixel Bridge. So first, let's cover the Unreal Engine Marketplace. So if you open up the Epic Games Launcher, you want to head over to the Unreal Engine Marketplace right over here at the top. We can go ahead and add our first asset pack to our project. So for example, we can go ahead and find an asset pack. So for me, we're going to use a free asset pack. So if you click on the free up here, we can hit this little drop down and go to Epic Games Content. Now this will show us all the free assets from Epic Games, and you can go through the different pages, go to the next page, and browse all of the free assets that they have. Another thing that you can do is you can go to free. You can see that there's other different categories. You have things like mega scans, free for the month, permanently free collection. So if we click on permanently free collection, these are assets that are permanently free, meaning that they will be free forever. So you can use them for your projects or whatever you're doing inside of the engine. Okay. Now to actually go ahead and add one of these asset packs to your project, let's say I want to go ahead and add this free furniture pack. So if you click on it here, you can also search for it. If you type in free furniture pack, you can see that it'll pop up right here, so you can navigate to it. So as you can see, there are some free furniture assets in this pack. Let's go ahead and actually add this to our project. So to add marketplace content to your project, you just click, if it's free, you can click on this free button, or you can add it to your cart. Either way will work. If you click on the free button, it will go ahead and take a second. It'll say unavailable. Just give it a second, and then it should say add to project. So there's a couple things that you need to note when adding marketplace content specifically to your project. You should note the supported platforms, which platforms it supports, and more importantly, you should note the supported engine versions. Okay, this is very important. Now currently you can see that this supports Unreal Engine 4.18 all the way to 4.27, and it also supports Unreal Engine 5.0 all the way to 5.3. Now I will show you what happens if you add a asset pack that's not supported for the version that you're using. But right now you can see that this pack is supported for 5.3, so we shouldn't have any issues with it when we add it to our project. So let's go ahead and add it to our project. So you click on this add to project button, and then it will show you all the different projects that you have. Now I currently have a couple of different projects. Now what I want to do is I want to search for the name of my project, or in your case it might be the only project that you have in here. So I searched my first project. I'm going to select my project and just click the add to project button. Okay, so that will go ahead and start downloading and installing that pack to our project from the Unreal Engine marketplace. Now if we go ahead and minimize this, now if we go back to our project, we should notice a new folder in our content. So if we go back to your content folder, we should now have a new folder for this free furniture pack. So if you double click and open that up, you can see we have more different folders inside of it. Things like blueprints, maps, materials, meshes, textures. So let's go ahead and look at the furniture pack. So I know that the furniture assets are props, and therefore they should be in the meshes folder. So if I double click and open that up, you can see that we have all the different meshes in this folder. Okay, so we can scroll through them and see all the different props that we have. We have things like these leather couches. I'm going to drag and drop it into our level here. We have things like this bed mesh, some chair, and these are just some nice high quality props that you can use in your project. Okay, so that is how you can add marketplace content into your project from the Unreal Engine marketplace. Now there's one other way that you can actually add marketplace content, and that is through your vault. So if you head over to your library tab, if you scroll all the way down to your vault, you can also add marketplace assets that you've either claimed or you've purchased from the marketplace through your vault. So for example, if I wanted to search for that furniture pack, you can see I have that free furniture pack. I can add it to my project from this menu. Okay, so that's also another way that you can add assets to your project, and the vaults will show you all the assets that you owned, whether you purchased them or if you claimed them when they were free for the month. Okay, now let's cover how to add marketplace assets that are outdated. So in the marketplace tab, we're going to search for an outdated product. So I know that this product is outdated, so you can just search for it as well. So if you search for military weapon and filter by free, so you see under the max price, we can click on this free. You're going to see that we have these two different packs here, or actually three different packs. Now if I click on this military weapons dark, you can see this is a game asset pack that has all these different weapons that we could use for, say, if we were making something like a first-person shooter game. But right now, the main thing I want to focus on is the supported engine versions. So as you can see, it's 4.4 all the way to 4.27. So we don't have any Unreal Engine 5 versions that are actually supported. Now, if I wanted to add this to my project, I could still add it even though it's not supported for that project version. Now, the way that I'd go about doing that is I would click on this add to project. Right now, you're going to see that it only shows the projects that are supported. So it might not even show you any projects because you might not have Unreal Engine 4 installed. Because I have Unreal Engine 4 installed, you can see these are the projects that I have for Unreal Engine 4. But to add it to our Unreal Engine 5 project, you want to click on show all projects, okay? That's going to show all the projects that you have. I'm going to search for my first project, and then we're going to see it right here. So if I actually go ahead and select it, you're going to see that we have this red message down here, asset not compatible with version 5.3. Please select the closest alternative version. And you can see that the add to project button is grayed out. So what we have to do is select the closest alternative version so that we can add it to this project. So to do that, you want to select the version that is the closest to Unreal Engine 5.3. In our case, 4.27 is the closest version because it goes from the lowest all the way up to the highest version. So this is the closest version that we have to 5.3. So I'm going to click on that, and then now we can actually go ahead and click on this add to project. So now if we click on that, you can see that it is downloading, installing, and adding it to our 5.3 project, even though the supported versions are only in Unreal Engine 4. Okay, so now if we go back to our project folder, go to our content folder, we should see a new folder in here for our military weapon dark. So we can double click and open that up. You can see we have a couple of different folders in here, and we have this weapons folder. If I double click and open that up, you can see we have a bunch of different file types, but you can see we have all those different weapon props that we saw from the Unreal Engine Marketplace. Okay, so that is how you could add content that isn't supported for that project. I think that is a bit of information that is useful because even though a lot of assets on the marketplace, especially free assets, haven't been updated, you can still use them in newer versions of the engine. Now, that isn't to say that you will have some issues with older assets. So keep in mind, if you are going to be purchasing actual marketplace assets, I would not purchase an asset that hasn't been updated to that Unreal Engine version. Just because you're spending money on a product, the person who is updating that asset pack should have it updated and should keep it maintained. Really, I only follow this rule for things like free assets, okay? So that is how you can add assets from the Unreal Engine Marketplace. Now let's talk about Quixel Bridge. So Quixel Bridge is a free asset library of over 10,000 plus assets that you can use inside of Unreal Engine. It's built directly into the engine, and these are very high quality photorealistic assets. So to access Quixel Bridge, once you go to this cube plus icon, if you click this little drop down, and we have this Quixel Bridge option. So if you click on that, it will go ahead and open up Quixel Bridge. You can see Windows Firewall has blocked some features. I'm going to click Allow Access. And then we have the actual Quixel Bridge window right here. Okay, so you can see I can move this window around. You can even dock this window up here. So if I take this window, I can actually dock it up at the top here. So you can see I can switch between the bridge window and also our third-person map window. Okay, so in here, this is Quixel Bridge. So you can see we have search 14,543 assets. So that's the total amount of assets that are free here on Quixel Bridge. So if you scroll through all of this, you can see all of the free high quality assets that you can use in your projects for free as long as you're using Unreal Engine, okay? Now, what we need to do right off the bat is we should actually go ahead and sign in to Quixel Bridge. So you actually need to sign in if you want to add any of these assets to your project. Otherwise, it's not going to show them as free. So for example, if I were to click on this mossy boulder right here, you can see it wants us to sign in before we can actually do anything. So you can click on this little profile icon up here and click sign in. It'll ask you to log in, and I would just recommend logging in with your Epic Games account. That way, all of the stuff will be linked to your Epic Games account, and you can claim any of the assets for free. So I'm going to go ahead and click sign in with Epic Games. Okay, and then now I should be signed in. So now I'm actually signed in. So now if I were to click on this mossy boulder, you can see I now have this download icon because I'm signed in to Quixel Bridge. Okay, so let's actually talk about the assets here on Quixel Bridge. Now, first up, whenever you open up Quixel Bridge, you're going to notice we have this little banner image. This will show you a new free asset collection whenever they update or add something new to Quixel Bridge. So you can go to the collection, and you can see that it's a collection of related assets to a specific theme. In this case, this is old workshop tools. So you can see all the high quality assets. Now, these are all photo scan assets, which means that these are all real world objects that the team over at Epic and Quixel Bridge have gone ahead and scanned these objects, okay? So that type of process is where they take very high resolution cameras and they capture every single angle around the object so you can get a very high quality lifelike scan, which is why all of these assets, you can look at them, they all look like real world objects because they are all photo scan assets and they're very high quality. Now this is the old workshop collection. We can go ahead and back out of it. So if you look at the search bar, you can click on this little X and that will bring us back to the home page. You can also click on the home page through here, and we also have a way that we can navigate through Quixel Bridge over here on the left. So we can filter by 3D assets. So if you click on 3D assets, this will show you all the different props that we have on Quixel Bridge. So we have different categories, things like buildings, food items, historical, industrial, nature, props, all sorts of stuff. So we can scroll through all the different objects here and see what type of items that we have. Now, say you find a particular item that you want to add to your project. Like for example, say I want to add this loaf of bread. So if I click on it, you can see we have the preview image of it, a very high quality 3D scan. They also have a size comparison, so you can see how big the object is or how big the scale is. This applies to any object that you have selected. So I can select this electrical box, and you can see the size right there. And this is especially helpful for things like rocks. So if I select this mossy boulder, you can see how big that rock is. I can select this rocky moss shelf, and you can see exact size. Also, another thing is you can see related assets. So this is very helpful because say I want to add like some sort of bakery scene in my level, I can see all of the other different assets related to this loaf of bread. Okay, so we have things like donuts. These are all very high quality photo scan assets. Okay, so say I actually want to add this donut. You have a couple of different options for downloading and adding it to your project. So down here we have different quality settings. So we have low quality, medium quality, and high quality. Now another thing to note is they also have an additional setting called Nanite quality. So let me select a different object because this is not really a good example. So I look for this mossy boulder. If I click the drop down, we have now those 4 different option types. So I have low, medium, high, and then Nanite. So depending on your computer specs, it really depends on what type of computer you have. You want to select the appropriate quality for this asset. Now, whether that be low, medium, or high quality. Now with the Nanite quality, this is the absolute maximum quality. Basically, if you select this Nanite option, that is essentially the raw 3D scanned object in the scene. And I'm going to show you what Nanite is. It's actually one of Unreal Engine 5's flagship features, which allows you to have raw 3D scanned assets with very high detail running in real time in your scene. So I'm going to select Nanite, and then I can actually click download, and it's going to go ahead and download the asset. So we'll give it a couple of seconds for it to download. And then now that it's downloaded, I can click on this add icon. So click the little plus icon. It will take us back to our project. And it will actually pull up in our content browser where that mossy boulder has been added. Okay, so you can actually see that it created a new folder in our content browser called Content, Megascans, 3D Assets, Mossy Boulder. So we have a couple of different asset types. So you can see we have this material instance, we have this static mesh, which is the actual rock prop, and then we have these 3 textures. Okay, so let's go ahead and drag in our mossy boulder into our scene. So if we select the static mesh and drag and drop it, you're going to see that we have this very high quality mossy boulder. Okay, and so this is what I was talking about earlier with the Nanite quality of mesh. I can actually close my content browser so I can have a bigger viewport. But as you can see, it's a very high quality mesh where you can see all the little details and it's basically just a raw 3D scan of this object, okay? And just to show you how much detail this has, I can switch my view mode. So over into the lit, or in the view mode, I can switch this from lit to wireframe. And you can see all of the little triangles that comprise this very high detailed model, okay? So this is what the Nanite mesh has to offer inside of Unreal Engine. And mostly all of the assets on Quixel Bridge, especially things like the rocks, have that option for Nanite quality if you want that maximum quality in your scene. This is very useful for creating things like cinematics because you can get the maximum quality out of all the assets in your scene. But you can also even make games with this because this all works in real time. So that is Quixel Bridge asset types. Now, one thing I want to cover is you can actually move and undock this window. And so if we undock the window from our main tab up there, I can resize this window. I could even snap this window anywhere in the editor. So you can actually go ahead and customize the look of your editor. And say I want to drag it and drop it right here next to my details. I can even put the window side by side here. And a neat feature about this is if I have my window out like this or docked in there, say I want to add a different asset, say this mossy rock shelf. If I just drag and drop it, I can actually drag and drop the mesh directly from Quixel Bridge into our level. Now what you're going to notice is a very low quality asset, and that is because it will drag in a preview mesh while the actual asset is downloading. So this is actually a preview mesh, and so now you can see that it's finished downloading, and now we have the actual very high detailed Nanite mesh, okay? So this is a very nice, useful tool because say I want to go ahead and download another different asset type, maybe this beach rock shelf. I can drag and drop it, and again, you're going to see that it downloads this little preview of the mesh. I can move around, scale around, and while we're waiting for it, it's still downloading in the background. And when it's finished downloading, it'll swap out that preview mesh for the actual high quality mesh, okay? So now you can see that it swapped it out. We have this very high detailed Nanite mesh. Now, I think the materials on this are a little bit off. So you can see this is pretty much like this charcoal black, whereas this is sort of like this gray color. So if we wanted to customize that material, I'm going to go ahead and dock my bridge up here at the top. I'm actually going to select this mesh and say I want to actually customize the color of this rock. So if you select it in the details panel, we're going to use the materials, and the materials are what you can actually use to customize the color and texture of an asset. So if I click this browse icon to this beach material, it'll go ahead and pull up in our content browser where that material is located. And if I double click and open this up, this will actually pull up a brand new window that we are unacquainted with, which I will explain to you very briefly. So this little window is sort of like our material preview. So you can see we have a little sphere or a little ball that shows us the material and texture. And then over on the right, we have this details panel where you can see we have all these little checkbox and settings. Now, without getting too in depth about all of this stuff, we just want to change the simple color of this material. Now, the neat thing about all the Megascans assets is all of the materials have these same settings. So you can change the color on any of the materials that you have. So if I click on this albedo tint, I hit the little checkbox, that will allow us to change the actual color of our rock material. So if I select this little white box right here, it'll actually pull up this color picker where we can now pick a different color that we want to set this rock to. So say we wanted to change the tint of the rock to maybe be sort of this tan tint. I can click OK. I can click this little save icon, and now you can see that we can actually change the color by just changing that albedo tint to a different color tint. Okay. Now getting back to Quixel Bridge, those are basically the methods that you can download and add assets to your project, whether that be selecting an object, downloading it, and adding it manually, or whether you drag and drop it from the bridge window into your scene. That is basically the process of adding assets through Quixel Bridge. And you can even close out of the Quixel Bridge window And if you want to get back to it, you can always navigate to it by clicking the Q plus icon and reopening up the Quixel Bridge window. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and delete all these assets real quickly from our scene. So select and delete those. Now I kind of want to pivot this and talk about all the different sub-editors inside of Unreal Engine. Mainly things like static meshes and materials. So let's go ahead and talk about the different sub-editors. So if you go to your content drawer here, we can go ahead and dock it back in our layout. So if you click the dock in layout, that will go ahead and dock our content browser right back here. So if you go to your content folder, and if we go into our starter content, let's go into the props folder. So go to starter content props. You can see that we have all those different props that we were messing around with earlier. Now, if you haven't noticed already, you can actually double click and open up these props in a new window. So if I double click this static mesh chair, if I double click it, it will actually open up a separate window where we can see that prop. Okay. Now this window, you can actually take it and dock it here at the top, which is what I usually like to do whenever I open up an object like that. I usually take this window and dock it up here at the top. And again, you can switch between the two windows. Okay, so let's actually talk about this sub-editor, which is the static mesh preview window. Okay, so whenever you have a static mesh in your content browser, you can double click and open it up, and that will bring you to this window or to the sub-editor. Now inside of here, let's go ahead and talk about the user interface real quickly. So in the center, we have the viewport, which is very similar to the viewport that we have in our main window over here. You can see that it has sort of the same options. So we have perspective, lit, show. We also have some of the other options over here, but as you can see, we can't really modify, scale, or rotate this mesh inside of here. But we also have things like the camera speed, and that's very useful because say I wanted to look and inspect this object really closely, you can go in and change the camera speed so we can get a little bit more control over the camera. Okay. You can also see a couple of different stats about this model, things like how many triangles it has, vertices, and all that stuff. So just some other useful information about this mesh. Now this is the viewport. We also have over here on the right the details. Now this is very similar to the details that you'll find inside of the main window here. So if I were to select this chair, in the details, we're going to see sort of the same details that we see in the static mesh window. Okay. We have things like the materials. We also have things like Nanite if we want to enable Nanite for the mesh. I'll explain more in depth what Nanite is towards the end of the video. Then down below it, we have a lot more other different settings. Okay. Now the main thing you will be using the static mesh editor window for is for changing things like the default material. So you can change the material itself. And also if you're using this prop or if you're using the engine for making games, chances are you will be coming to this menu to change things like the collision settings. Okay. So the main two things are the materials and collision settings in here. So let's talk about the materials real quickly. So just like if you were to change the materials in the details, you can do it in the details panel right here. Now, if we were to change the materials over here in the static mesh window, that will actually change the default materials for this object. So for example, if I hit this little drop down, I can set this material to our M_chrome. Now we'll change it to this completely chrome chair. Now if I hit save, if I go back into my third person map, you can see that any of the objects that we have placed in our level now have this chrome material because we're affecting that default material inside of the static mesh window. Okay. So now if I were to drag in this SM chair, you can see that it now has that default material applied to it. If I drag in more of these, you can see it's now that chrome material. Okay. So that is how you can change the default material on a prop or object by going into that static mesh editor window and changing the material through here. So I'm going to change it back to the M_chair material, save that, and it will go ahead and update the material in our level. Okay. So that is the static mesh editor window, a very common sub-editor of the engine. So again, you can open up things like the table, and that will pull it up in that window. You can open up things like the bush, and that's how you would change things like the default material and also things like collision settings. Okay. Now there's many different sub-editors inside of Unreal Engine, and you're going to notice this whenever you double click on an asset, it has its own sub-editor. So if I go back to our starter content, let's go into the textures folder. If I double click any of the textures, so I double click on this brick clay texture, you can see that it has sort of this own window that it pops up with, where it shows us the actual texture, some of the details, and different types of settings, okay? So there's many different sub-editors within the engine. Now don't let that overwhelm you, because most of this stuff will just come with time. Now the very last thing that I want to cover, or the last sub-editor that I want to cover, is the material editor. So if I go into our materials folder, we have all these basic materials over here. So for example, let's say I want to open up this M basic floor material. Okay, very simple material. Let's double click, open that up. You're going to see that we have, again, this new sort of window that you've never seen before. So if I take this window and dock it up here at the top, we can actually see it full screen. So this is the material editor, okay? So again, this is a sub-editor within the engine, where we can do things like create our own materials so that we can apply it to objects in our scene. So let's really quickly explain the material editor. So over here we have our viewport. So again, this is a very simple viewport. You can't actually move in the viewport here, but if you hold the left mouse button, you can rotate around the sphere. The sphere is a preview of the material that we have. In our case, it's very basic floor material. You can hold the left mouse button to rotate around. You can hold the right mouse button to zoom in and out. We have our basic perspective, lit, and show modes right here. And then down in the bottom right, you're going to notice we have these different shape previews. So I can click on this. We can change it to a cylinder. We can change it back to a sphere. We have this simple panel. Then we have a cube that we can also preview the material on. Okay. We also have this last thing right here. And basically this allows us to preview the material on a mesh that we have selected. So what that means is if I go to my content browser, if I go to one of my props folders, so if I go to the props folder and maybe say I select this chair, I can go back into the material and click on that little icon, and that will show us the material on this custom mesh. So right now we have this checkered material, and I think it's having trouble applying the material to the object, so I'm going to switch it back to our little sphere, and then if you switch it back over, you can see that we now have that material applied onto that chair. This is because we have that chair selected in the browser. You can have it as a prop to preview the material on it. So that is the viewport. Down below it, we have things like the details. So again, just like any other details panel, we have different settings that will change our material. And then over here in the center, we have the graph, okay? So you can notice it by this little grid pattern. This is basically the graph. And to move around in the graph, you can scroll with your mouse wheel in and out to zoom in and out. And then if you hold your right mouse button, that's how you can pan around, okay? So scroll in and out and right mouse button to pan around. So this is the graph. And currently you can see we have a couple of different nodes on the graph, okay? So these are different nodes. And you see we have these little wires that are connecting the nodes together. And that's really all that a simple material is comprised of, are nodes and wires that are connecting them together, okay? So you can see we have things like this color material, and in fact I could even change the color of this material if I double click on this color node. So if I double click on this color node, you can see it brings up that color picker window. So I change the color, say like this green color, click OK. Now you can see our material is now green, okay? So this little color node changes the color of our material, and we can really change this color to whatever we want. So we want this dark blue. Now if I hit save, it will go ahead and save that material. If I go back to my third person map, let's go back to that material. There's two different ways we can find that material. Say if we go back into the starter content materials, that's one way. If you go back to the material window, you can see that we have that browse icon. So we have that folder browse icon. If you click on that, it will browse to that material in the content browser. So a lot of these sub-editors will have that button. It's very useful to quickly go back and find the asset in the content browser. So now we can see that material, that blue, dark blue material that we just changed and updated. So if I wanted to apply this material again, I could drag and drop it onto an object. Now we'll go ahead and set that object's material to that new blue color that we just created. Okay, so that is the material sub-editor. Let's actually cover how to make a brand new material from scratch. So if we go back to our starter content materials, say we want to actually go back and create our own folder. So in our starter content, let's right click, create a new folder, and we'll name this to My Materials. If we double click that, we can create our own materials. So if you right click, this will bring up the asset creation window or tab where we can create basic assets. So we have things like our blueprints, levels, materials. So in our case, we want to create a basic material. So let's select that. You can see that it now adds that asset to our content browser. And now we can go ahead and rename this. So whenever you're naming materials, you want to do a M underscore because that is for the naming convention of materials. You'll always have a M in the front just for organization. That way you know that this is a material. And then you can have it after that the name of the material. So I'm going to name this to My First Material. So we should have our M underscore My First Material. Okay. So if I double click and open this up, it will bring us to that material sub editor. And again, I can take this window and dock it up here at the top. Okay, now in the graph, I can again right click and zoom in and out. Now, because this is a brand new material, we're not going to see any nodes here on the graph. Well, we have this very basic main node right here, but you can see we don't have any of those color nodes and wires hooked up here on the graph. And you can also see that our material over here on the preview is just this dark color. Okay. Now to go ahead and create our very first material, we're going to add a simple color node, the same node that we were using in the other material, and hook it up so we can change the color of this material. So if you right click anywhere on the graph, you're going to see we have this search option, and it'll bring us a bunch of different things that we can add in here. Now we just want to add a color. So for color, I want to search for constant, and we have constants, and we want to choose the constant vector 3. Okay. Now there's a lot of different nodes and different material nodes, and if you want to go more in depth into materials, there are different types of nodes that do different sort of things. But this constant vector 3, this is what allows us to choose and assign a color to our material. So you can see that we have our little black box right here. So if I double click that, that will pull up our color picker that we saw earlier. So I could change this to say that green color, but it's not affecting our material in our preview window. And that's because we need to hook this up to our material node right here so that I can go ahead and apply this color to our material. So the way that we do that is through those wires. So if you see, we have all these different pins right here. We have this white pin, red pin, green pin, and blue pin. Now we want to take this white pin and plug it into this base color. Okay. And now you're going to see that it applies that material color, the green color, to our material because we have this color node and this wire that's connecting it to the base color. Okay. So the base color affects obviously the base color of the material. And then we can go ahead and change it to whatever color that we want it. Okay. So we can go ahead and save that. And now if I close out of there, you see that we now have our first material that we've ever created. And again, we can go ahead and apply it to random objects. So I accidentally applied it to the floor there. I want to go ahead and select that and undo it. So I'll go ahead and reset that. I just want to apply it for the chairs here. Okay. So again, that's just the basics of some of the sub-editors within the engine. Things like the static meshes and the material editor. As you continue learning, you will learn more about some of the other different nodes and how to create more advanced types of materials. Okay, so we've covered over the sub-editors inside the engine. Like I said, there are more different types of sub-editors that you will find if you just click on different assets in your content browser. Now, the last sub-editor that I want to talk about in this video are blueprints, or the blueprint sub-editor. So blueprints are the visual scripting system of Unreal Engine, and basically It allows you to create things like tools, games, and all sorts of different things. In fact, we have a couple of different examples of blueprints. So if you go into the content, starter content, we have a folder for blueprints. And these are blueprint assets because we have the blueprint class at the very bottom. And you can see that they are color coded with this blue, dark blue color. So we have this blueprint ceiling light. Let's go ahead and drag this into our level. Let's go ahead and move this up. So you can see that this is a light blueprint. So if I go ahead and let me actually move this closer to the wall so we can actually see the light, because it's kind of hard with the time of day here. We can actually change the lighting settings of this blueprint, and it will change the light of this little lamp that is emitting. So if you look in the details, we have this blueprint ceiling light. And underneath the settings here, we have different settings that we can customize. And these are settings that have been made in this blueprint. So we can change things like the brightness. So if I increase the brightness, you can see it increases the brightness of our lamp. I can reset it back to the default brightness. I can also do things like change the color. And that will change the color of our light to maybe this green color. And basically that is the power of blueprints. You can convert certain objects to props. So for example, I could have this door, I could convert that into a blueprint. And then when I would run up to the door, I could press a key on my keyboard and that will go ahead and open up the door. So you can create different blueprints and they can add in certain functionality, whether that is a tool like this lamp where we can change the brightness and color and we can move it around in our level, or whether that be gameplay things like for a game, we have things like a door that your player can interact or open in the level. So let's go ahead and actually open up this blueprint. So if you double click and open up the blueprint ceiling light, this will actually pull up a brand new window, which we can dock over here at the top. And this is basically the blueprint editor, okay? Now the blueprint editor has a lot of different UI elements in here. I'm gonna briefly explain the user interface, but I'm going to have a complete tutorial on how to get started with blueprints. It will be the follow-up to this video, so I'll leave a link to it in the description below. That will cover fully in depth the blueprints, how to create them, and it will create different types of blueprint examples. But just for the sake of this video, we're going to briefly cover blueprints. So in here, this is the blueprint editor. So on the center of the editor, we have this graph. And just like in the material graph, you can scroll in and out and you can right click and move around. We actually have different tabs in here. So we have things like the event graph, the construction script, and the viewport. Now, if you head over to the viewport tab, you can see we have the same sort of viewport controls that we do in our normal viewport. And we can actually move around inside of this viewport. Now, inside of the viewport, you'll notice that we have that lamp prop. And we also, if you move all the way down here, we have that little light, point light, okay? So that's really all this blueprint is made of, is this a lamp prop and this little point light, okay? And those little controls we were playing around with, the color and the intensity, that's what was controlling this little light. Now the way that they have set that up is through a series of nodes. So if you head over to the construction script, you can see that we again have these different types of nodes and all these different types of wires. And that's really all that blueprint is a series of different nodes connected by different wires to form different type of logic. So for example, we have things like our point light, which is this point light right here. That is being set to this brightness value that we change, which if you go back in the third person map, if you select the ceiling light blueprint, you see we have things like the brightness value. So when I change that value, basically in the blueprint graph, it's taking that value and setting the intensity of this point light in the blueprint. So that's really all that blueprint is it's a series of these nodes and different variables that can change things and either be used for tools or creating things like gameplay for making games. So let's go ahead and actually create a brand new blueprint so I can show you how it works from scratch. So let's go ahead and in our blueprints folder, we'll right click, create a new folder, and this will just be my first blueprint. Then in that folder, we can go ahead and create our very first blueprint. So let's go ahead and right click, and up here at the top, we have blueprint class. So create a basic asset. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a new blueprint class. Now this will pop up in a whole different window where it says pick a parent class. So these are all the different types of blueprints that you can create. So we have things like an actor, which is a simple object that can be placed or spawned in the world. Similar to our ceiling light, we have things like a pawn, which is an actor that can be controlled, a character, which is if you're making games, you want, a character that you can play as. And we have a couple of other different types of blueprint classes that we'll kind of just gloss over. What we want to create is a simple actor blueprint. So go ahead and select that and create it. And now we'll go ahead and add that asset to our content browser. And we can just leave that as new blueprint. Now you can go ahead and right click, rename this to BP underscore my first blueprint. So BP underscore is the naming for blueprints. So it would be BP underscore and then the name of that blueprint. And now we can go ahead and double click and open this up and take this and dock this up here at the top. So again, you can see we have our viewports, the construction script, the event graph. Now if you head over to the event graph, you see we have these different nodes. We're just going to create a very simple blueprint that prints out hello world to our screen. So I'm going to use this event begin play. So you can see it's currently grayed out, and that's because we don't have anything hooked up to it. So we're going to print out to the screen a very simple hello world. So off of this execution pin, if you drag it, you can see we get sort of this wire. And if you drop it, it will give you an options menu. You can also access that options menu by right-clicking on the graph, and it'll get you that same options menu. Now what we want to type is a print string. So under the print string, we have this print string. So if we click on that, we now have this print string node. And in the string, we have this hello text, okay? So we can even modify the text to say hello world. If we press enter, we'll go ahead and save that text. Then we just need to connect this node to this event begin play. Because what the event begin play does is whenever we go ahead and hit play in our level, everything off of this will get fired off or be executed. So off of this node, we can drag it and that will create a wire. We just need to hook that up to this node, the print string node. So now all we have to do to save this is you actually want to hit this compile, because whenever you make any changes, whenever you hook up certain nodes, you just want to hit the compile and then the save icon. Okay. So now we should be able to see this hello world be printed when we hit play. But the first thing that we need to do is we need to actually go ahead and drag this into our level. Okay, for this blueprint to be fired off. Same thing with our lamp. For our lamp blueprint to exist, we need to drag it into the level. So for our first blueprint, let's take that and drag it into the level. You can see that there's no real visual for it. It's just this little movement gizmo because it's just an empty blueprint class. So now if we hit play, you can see up in the top left, hello world. So let me go ahead and do it again. If I hit stop and hit play, we should see hello world be printed off in the top left. And that is because in our blueprint, we have that event begin play. So when the game starts, we print off the string hello world. So we can even name this to whatever. We could say my first blueprint test. Then if we compile that and save that, then we go back into our level and hit play, we can now see my first blueprint test. Okay, so that's really the basics of blueprint. It's just a series of nodes that you can connect together to create functionality. You have different types of blueprints that you can create, and then you can drag them into your level so that you can actually use them. It's useful for creating gameplay elements, things like doors, lights, weapons, characters, but also you can use it to create tools if you're not going to be creating games. Things like this light tool. You can create more different advanced blueprint tools that can help you and assist you in whatever you're using the engine for. Now, like I said, I will have a full blueprint for beginners tutorial. So I'll have that linked in the description below. and I'll go more in depth about blueprints and all the different things that you can use it for. So before we end the video, there are a couple of other things that I want to cover over. Things like I said I would early on in the video. So I said we would cover over how to create brand new levels. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So to create a brand new level, you can go to File and you can create a new level. There's that way. And you can also create a level inside of your content browser. Either way will work. Now for us, let's actually create it inside of the content browser. So if you go to Starter Content, we have a folder for maps. And in here, you can see we have all sorts of different level assets. If you wanted to open up a different level, you can say double click on this minimal default. And you can see we're in a completely new level. You can see the name of the level, minimal default. And you can see there's different assets in this level and in the outliner. We can open up things like the starter map, which has a lot more of the different materials and props lined up for us, so we can mess around with different things. Now to create our own blank new level, you can right click in the content browser and you can see under the create basic asset, we have that level. So if we click level, that will go ahead and create a new map for us. So we can just leave this as new world. And if I double click and open this up, it's going to ask us to save our current level. So we'll click save selected. And now we're in that new level. So you can see it says new world. Now, as you can see, this is a completely blank level. There's no lighting inside of here. And that's what happens when you actually create a level through the content browser. Now you can add lights and lighting manually to this level, or you can create a new level through here, and that will go ahead and allow you an option to create a world with the lighting set up. So actually, let me show you that before I show you how to set up the lights manually. So if we go to the File, New Level, you can see that this actually gives us different options, whereas if we were to create it in the content browser, it gives us that empty level with nothing in it, okay? Now this can be useful. It just depends on what you're making, but you can see we have different templates. We have basic and open world. So if we go to basic here, this will create a brand new level, and it just has some basic lighting. You can see we have clouds, we have the sun, and this basic floor, okay? Right now we created the level, we actually need to save it. So you want to do a file, save current level as, and that will allow you to actually save the level that you have. So you want to go to starter content, maps, or wherever you want to save the map. And we're just going to leave this as a new map and click save. And now we have created that new level with all the lighting inside of it, okay? So if we wanted to go ahead and create the lighting from scratch, there's actually a neat little tool that allows us to do that. So if we were to open up the new world, so this is that blank level that we created, there's actually a neat tool called the Environment Light Mixer, which allows us to add lighting and atmosphere with just one click of a button. So we go to Windows. Down here we have this Environment Light Mixer. So if you open that up, this allows us to create all those different lights by just clicking on these buttons and adding it to our level. So we have create skylight, create atmospheric light, create sky atmosphere. Now you can see we actually have this blue sky. We still have this void down here. So we'll continue clicking on these next buttons. So we'll click create volumetric clouds. So now we have some clouds in our scene. And lastly, we'll add a height fog, okay? So now we can exit out of the Environment Light Mixer. And basically we have a blank level now populated with some lighting, okay? Now let's actually take a second to talk about lighting and some of the flagship features in Unreal Engine, such as Lumen and Nanite. Now chances are, if you have watched any Unreal Engine showcase videos, chances are they have mentioned some of these features called Nanite and Lumen, which are Unreal Engine 5's flagship features. So let's talk about Lumen first. So Lumen is the dynamic global illumination system, and basically it's what allows us to have dynamic lighting inside of Unreal Engine as opposed to having static lighting where the lights have to be baked manually and they aren't dynamic, meaning they aren't real time. So for example, the lighting inside of our scene, as you may have already noticed, whenever we move objects in our scene, they will dynamically cast shadows, and we don't have to re-render or rebake any of the lights in our scene. Now you can also change the time of day or the lighting in any of your levels by hitting the Control L on your keyboard, and that will give you this little tool. And if you just hold down Control and then click L, if you hold down the Control key, this will allow you to move the sunlight or the directional light. So you can create whatever time of day you want and move around the lighting. Okay, so we can put it sort of on the horizon. So it's either sort of like a sunset or a sunrise. You can move it up in the sky, so it's like a high noon, and pretty much change the direction of the lighting. And you can see Lumen reacting in real time, as you can see the lights and shadows on those volumetric clouds in real time. We can even test this out in our other level. Let's actually get back to the other level that we were in. So if you go to your content browser, you can dock this in layout. So the third person map is actually in a different folder. It's not in the starter content. You want to go to content, third person, maps, and that third person map that we're in for the majority of this tutorial. So we double click, open that up. Now we're back in that level. So we can change the lighting by hitting Control L, and you can see, we can set it sort of like the sunset, and you can see all the objects in our scene react dynamically to the lighting. Okay, we can even pull some of these other objects out here. You can see that it casts shadows. I don't have to rebake any lights. It's all in real time. Okay, so that is the power of Lumen. The fact that you can have realistic dynamic lighting with really natural balanced lighting. Now the other feature I want to cover is Nanite. Now Nanite is the other big feature inside of Unreal Engine, which allows you to have very high quality meshes. We've kind of gone over it when we were downloading that Nanite rock early on in the video. So let's actually go back to that rock mesh. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that rock mesh into our scene. So if we go to Megascans, in our content folder, Megascans 3D assets, this is how we get back to those Quixel Megascans assets that we added. So we should have this mossy boulder. So now we can see we have the different assets in here. This is the actual static mesh, because we know it says static mesh at the bottom there. So this is the actual rock mesh. Let's drag that into our level. And as you can see, just a very high detailed rock mesh. And again, Nanite and Lumen go hand in hand with each other, because I can rotate this rock and you can see the lighting react dynamically, and you can see all the little cavities and shadows that it creates. Okay, now to actually show the Nanite view of this mesh, we can go into a specific view mode. So if we go to the view mode button, we can actually change this to Nanite visualization. So if we go to overview, this will actually give us an overview where it can show us all of the Nanite meshes in our scene. Now this has 4 different windows. Now what we want to actually see are these triangles up here. So let's actually switch this Nanite visualization just to triangles. Okay. Now this will show us all of the different triangles that comprise this Nanite mesh, and you can see there are thousands upon thousands of tiny little triangles. And that's actually what makes it so high detailed, is because of all of these tiny little triangles that create all the little cavities and geometry. Okay, so this is a Nanite mesh, and even in the scene we have another mesh in here which isn't as highly detailed, which is this chair model. Now the thing about Nanite is it actually can be enabled on any mesh inside of your scene, as long as it's a static mesh. Okay. And the reason why you'd want to enable it on things in your scene is because it actually optimizes the mesh itself, meaning that if I move farther away from this object, so if I scale farther away, I actually want to go into a different view mode. So let's go to our view mode, switch this over to clusters. And now you can see basically how Nanite optimizes this mesh. So if I move out, you can see that these little clusters get larger and larger. And so this is a dynamic optimization that will reduce the amount of triangles the farther you get away from that object. So it's very optimized not only for film, but also for games, because you can enable Nanite on these meshes and it will automatically optimize the mesh and remove less geometry the farther you get away from it. Okay, so let's go back into the lit mode. Now let's talk about how to actually enable Nanite on a mesh, because say this couch or this other chair didn't have Nanite enabled on it. So to enable Nanite, it's actually very simple. You want to browse to that asset, so we can hit this little browse icon in the details panel. It will pull it up in our My Props folder. Let's dock this in layout. And actually need to re-browse to it. So let's hit the browse icon. That will again pull it up. So there's two different ways to enable Nanite. You can either do it through the details panel, or you can right click this mesh. You'll see we get a couple of different options. And at the very top we have Nanite in a checkbox. So if you just click on that checkbox, it'll actually take a second for it to apply. So if I right click, you can see that it's now checked. You can also open up the static mesh preview window or editor, and in the settings or in the details you can click enable Nanite support. Okay, so now if I hit save here, we can go back into that Nanite mode, the view mode. So if we hit under the lit, we can go to Nanite visualization, triangles, and we can see it's now using Nanite for that mesh. So Nanite is very useful because it allows you to have high quality meshes streamed in and out, whereas before, without Nanite, if you were trying to render this rock with all the detail, you would need pretty much a supercomputer to be able to handle something like this. Okay, so that is basically it for this video. So we went over a lot of different things, including things like the user interface, how to navigate around the engine. We've gone over the different asset types and how to manage assets in the content browser. We covered how you can actually get assets either from the marketplace or from Quixel Bridge. And then we've also covered some of the different sub-editors within the engine, things like materials, static meshes, and blueprints. So from here, you should have a basic understanding of the engine. And again, I'll be linking some follow-up tutorials to this video that will go more in depth to some of the other features, things like the material editor, blueprints, and much more. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button because I will be releasing a follow-up beginner tutorial for blueprints. And I'm also trying to hit 100,000 subscribers before the end of the year. So make sure you hit that bell icon so you don't miss out on any future Unreal Engine content. Also, if you want to check out my premium courses and learn how to make things like a multiplayer survival game, check out my website, smartpoly.teachable.com, where you can find all sorts of different courses. And that is pretty much it for this video. So as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.